Jackie Gleason was sweating through his shirt, and the show hadn't even started yet. It was October 3rd, 1965. Studio 50 in New York City. The Ed Sullivan Show, and Jackie Gleason, the great one, the man who'd once been the biggest star on television, was sitting in a dressing room that was noticeably smaller than the one he'd had 10 years ago when he was still untouchable. His hands were shaking, not from nerves, from the 3 drinks he'd had in the past hour, trying to steady himself. The flask in his jacket pocket was already half empty, and he still had 3 hours until showtime. Through the wall he could hear the production meeting, Ed Sullivan's voice, calm and authoritative, running through the evening schedule. Jackie closed his eyes and tried to remember when he'd been the one everyone else's schedule revolved around. A production assistant knocked. "Mr. Gleason, Ed would like to see you in his office." 5 minutes. Jackie stood up slowly. His knees hurt. Everything hurt these days. He was 49 years old and felt like he was 7. He looked at himself in the mirror, the weight he couldn't lose, the face that was puffy from drinking, the eyes that looked tired even after sleeping 12 hours. He took one more drink from the flask, straightened his tie, and walked toward Ed Sullivan's office, thinking this meeting would be about reconciliation. He had no idea it would be about terms of surrender. If you've ever believed that someone's invitation meant they'd forgiven you, only to discover they'd just been waiting until you were desperate enough to accept any conditions, subscribe now. Because what happened in that office, and what happened later on that stage, wasn't about 2 men burying a grudge. It was about one man proving that patience is the most devastating form of revenge. Let's rewind 10 years. Jackie Gleason was at the absolute peak of his power. The Honeymooners was dominating Saturday nights. His variety show was pulling massive ratings. CBS had given him creative control, unprecedented budgets, and a contract that made him the highest paid performer on television. Jackie Gleason didn't need anyone, and he made sure everyone knew it, especially Ed Sullivan. The 2 men had history. Jackie had appeared on Ed's show multiple times in the early 1950s, when he was still building his career. Ed had been supportive then, professional, encouraging, the gatekeeper who opened doors. But something shifted when Jackie became successful, when the Honeymooners made him a household name, when CBS started treating Jackie Gleason like the star of the network instead of Ed Sullivan. Ed didn't like that, didn't like watching someone he'd helped become more powerful than him, didn't like the way Jackie would show up late to rehearsals, change bits at the last minute, ignore the producer's notes, didn't like the entitlement. In March 1955, Ed booked Jackie for what was supposed to be a major variety segment, comedy sketches, musical numbers, a 20-minute showcase that would dominate the evening. But during rehearsal, Ed started making changes, cutting bits he thought were too long, suggesting different staging, telling Jackie not asking, telling how the segment should be performed. Jackie Gleason listened for about 5 minutes. Then he did something no one had ever done on Ed Sullivan's stage. He walked off, mid-rehearsal, in front of the entire crew. "I don't take direction from you, Ed. I'm not one of your trained monkeys. You want me on this show, you let me perform my way. Otherwise, find someone else." The crew went silent. Production assistants froze. This was mutiny, open rebellion against the man who controlled Sunday night television. Ed Sullivan's face went completely still, not angry, not embarrassed, just calculating. "Get out of my studio, Jackie." His voice was quiet, deadly quiet. Jackie laughed. "Gladly. I don't need your show, Ed. I'm bigger than your show. We both know it." Jackie Gleason walked out of Studio 50 that day believing he'd won, believing he'd established that he was untouchable, that his success made him immune to Ed Sullivan's gatekeeping. What he didn't understand was that Ed Sullivan didn't need to fight that battle right then. Ed understood something Jackie didn't. Power isn't about winning every confrontation. It's about waiting until the other person is weak enough that they come back begging. And Ed Sullivan was very, very patient. For the next 10 years, Ed Sullivan never mentioned Jackie Gleason on his show, never booked him, never acknowledged his existence. Not out of anger. Anger would have been too visible, too emotional, out of strategy, because Ed Sullivan knew something about show business that Jackie was about to learn the hard way. Fame is temporary, and the television industry has a very short memory for people who think they're too big to fail. By 1960, The Honeymooners was cancelled. The show that had defined an era lasted only 39 episodes. Jackie's variety show continued, but the ratings were declining. The drinking that had always been part of his image was becoming a problem. The weight gain was affecting his mobility. The reputation for being difficult to work with was making networks hesitant to commit. By 1965, Jackie Gleason was unemployed. His variety show had been cancelled. His movie deals had dried up. He was living in Miami, doing occasional club appearances, drinking heavily, and watching his savings disappear. That's when Ed Sullivan's producer called. Ed wants to let bygones be bygones. He thinks it's time to bring you back. Give you a proper segment. Remind America why they loved you. Jackie's first instinct was pride. Tell Ed Sullivan to go to hell. He didn't need that pompous gatekeeper. But then Jackie looked at his bank statements, looked at his calendar that showed 3 months without work, looked at the liquor bottles stacking up in his Miami apartment, and he said yes. The meeting in Ed's office on October 3rd, 1965, started friendly enough. Ed stood when Jackie walked in, shook his hand, gestured to a chair. "Jackie, good to see you. It's been too long." Jackie sat down carefully. His back hurt. "Everything hurt these days. Thanks for having me back, Ed. I appreciate the opportunity." Ed smiled, but it was the smile of someone who'd already won and was just enjoying the aftermath. "I think it's time we put the past behind us. What happened in 1955? That was a long time ago. We were both younger, more hot-headed." Jackie nodded, relieved. This was going better than he'd expected. "So here's what I'm thinking," Ed continued. "An 8-minute segment. You can do some of your classic characters, maybe a bit from The Honeymooners. Really remind people of the old Jackie Gleason. 8 minutes. Jackie's face tightened slightly. 10 years ago he'd had 20 minutes. But he couldn't say that. Couldn't negotiate. He needed this too badly. 8 minutes sounds fine, Ed. Good. Now, there are a few conditions. Jackie's stomach dropped. Conditions. The word hung in the air like a threat. Nothing major, Ed said casually. Just some guidelines to make sure everything runs smoothly. You'll stick to the approved material. No improvising. You'll follow the staging we set up. No changing blocking. And you'll be at rehearsal tomorrow at 2 p.m. sharp. Not 2:15. Not 2:30. Each condition was a small humiliation. A reminder that Jackie was no longer in control. That he was now subject to Ed Sullivan's rules. "Understood," Jackie said quietly. Ed leaned forward slightly. His voice dropped to something almost gentle, almost kind. "Jackie, I'm giving you a chance here. A real chance. Don't make me regret it." The unspoken message was clear. You need me now, and we both know it. Jackie left that office feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Powerless. But he told himself it was temporary. One good performance, and he'd be back. The old magic would return. America would remember why they loved him. He had no idea that Ed Sullivan had been planning this moment for 10 years. And the humiliation hadn't even started yet. The next day, Jackie showed up to rehearsal at 2 p.m. exact, sober, for once, prepared, ready to prove he was still the great one. But something was wrong immediately. The stage manager handed him a script. "Mr. Sullivan made some changes to your segment last night. New material. You'll need to memorize this by tomorrow." Jackie looked at the pages. This wasn't his material. These weren't his jokes. This was generic comedy that could be performed by anyone. Where's my Honeymooners bit? The character work I submitted. The stage manager looked uncomfortable. Mr. Sullivan felt the new material was more appropriate for the show's format. Jackie felt his face getting hot. This was exactly what had happened in 1955. Ed trying to control him. Ed making him perform like a trained monkey. But this time, Jackie couldn't walk off. This time, he needed the paycheck, needed the exposure, needed Ed Sullivan more than Ed Sullivan needed him. So he learned the new material, swallowed his pride, did what he was told. October 3rd, 1965. Showtime. Jackie Gleason stood backstage waiting for his introduction. His hands were shaking again. The flask was empty. He'd taken a few pills to calm his nerves. Just enough to take the edge off. Not enough to affect his performance. That's what he told himself. At 8:47 p.m., Ed Sullivan walked to center stage to introduce him. Jackie listened through the curtain, waiting for the warm introduction. Ed had promised, the reminder of Jackie's greatness, the setup that would make America excited to see him again. What he got was this. Ladies and gentlemen, our next guest was one of television's biggest stars in the 1950s. He's been away from our show for quite some time. Let's see if he's still got it. Please welcome Jackie Gleason. The audience applauded, but it was polite applause, uncertain. They'd just been told Jackie might not still have it. They'd been primed to watch him potentially fail. Jackie walked onto the stage. The lights were blinding. Hotter than he remembered. He found his mark. Looked out at the audience. He couldn't quite see clearly because of the pills and the lights and the decade that had passed since he'd last felt this kind of power. He launched into the material, the generic jokes Ed had given him, and immediately something was wrong. The timing was off. The jokes weren't landing. The audience was laughing politely, but not really. Not the way they used to laugh at Jackie Gleason. Not the way people laughed at genius. Jackie could feel himself sweating, could feel the performance slipping away. He tried to improvise, go back to his old material, the stuff that always worked. But his mind was fuzzy from the pills. The words weren't coming. He stumbled over a punchline, forgot the setup to another joke. The 8 minutes felt like 8 hours, and through it all, Jackie could see Ed Sullivan standing in the wings, not encouraging him, not rooting for him, just watching, with that same expression he'd had in his office. The expression of someone who was getting exactly what they wanted. Jackie finished his segment to scattered applause. Nothing close to a standing ovation. Nothing close to vindication. Just polite acknowledgement that he'd managed to get through his material without completely collapsing. He walked off stage, past Ed Sullivan, who was already turning away to introduce the next act. Ed didn't say good job, didn't offer any feedback, didn't acknowledge Jackie at all. Jackie made it to his dressing room and sat down heavily. His entire body was shaking now, not from the pill, from the realization of what had just happened. Ed Sullivan hadn't brought him back to give him a second chance. Ed had brought him back to prove a point, that 10 years ago, when Jackie said, "I'm bigger than your show," he'd been wrong. That fame is temporary, that everyone eventually needs Ed Sullivan, and that when you finally come crawling back, Ed will let you perform, but only after he's stripped away everything that made you special. Jackie Gleason got dressed slowly. His assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Gleason, CBS wants to know if you'd like to discuss future bookings." Jackie looked at himself in the mirror, at the man who'd once been the great one, who'd once been so powerful he could walk off Ed Sullivan's stage and not look back. "Tell them no." His assistant looked surprised. "But sir, this could lead to more opportunities." "I said no. I'm done." Because Jackie Gleason finally understood something that took 10 years to learn. Some invitations aren't opportunities, they're executions disguised as second chances. Ed Sullivan had waited a decade for Jackie to be weak enough to accept any terms, and then he'd used that weakness to prove to Jackie, to the audience, to the entire industry, that no one is bigger than the system, that talent without power is just a memory people are willing to watch fail. Jackie Gleason never appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show again, not because he was banned, but because he finally understood what the invitation had really been. Ed Sullivan's way of proving that patience is the cruelest form of revenge. The reviews the next day barely mentioned Jackie's segment. When they did, it was with pity. Jackie Gleason's attempt at a comeback fell flat. The Great One showed his age, a reminder that some stars burn out rather than fade away. Jackie read every review, let each one confirm what he already knew. Ed Sullivan had invited him back, not to revive his career, but to bury it publicly. Within a year, Jackie moved permanently to Miami. He continued working, smaller projects, character roles in films, occasional television appearances on shows that weren't The Ed Sullivan Show. He rebuilt a career, but never regained what he'd lost. Ed Sullivan continued hosting until in all those years, in all the retrospectives and anniversary specials, Jackie Gleason was mentioned exactly twice. Brief clips from the early 1950s before the fallout. No mention of the 1955 walkout. No mention of the just erasure disguised as history. When Ed Sullivan died in 1974, Jackie Gleason was asked to comment. His statement was brief. Ed Sullivan gave me my first big break on television, and years later he taught me that the people who build you up are often the ones who enjoy watching you fall the most. Both lessons were valuable. He never elaborated, never told the full story of what happened in 1965, but people who knew them both understood. Jackie Gleason died in His obituary called him a television legend, mentioned The Honeymooners as one of the greatest shows ever made, talked about his talent, his influence, his impact on comedy. It didn't mention Ed Sullivan, didn't mention October, but Jackie's daughter revealed years later that her father kept one thing from that night, not the script, not any memorabilia, just a note he'd written to himself afterward and kept in his wallet until he died. It said, "Never mistake someone letting you back in the door for forgiveness. Sometimes they're just making sure you see how small the room has become." Here's the real lesson of this story. The cruelest revenge isn't immediate. It isn't hot anger or public confrontation or dramatic fallout. The cruelest revenge is patience, waiting until someone who once thought they were untouchable becomes desperate, and then offering them exactly what they need, but only after you've made sure they understand that accepting it means admitting they were wrong about their own power. Ed Sullivan didn't destroy Jackie Gleason in 1955 when Jackie walked off his stage. That would have been too obvious, too emotional, too much like losing. Instead, Ed waited 10 years, waited until Jackie was broke and forgotten and desperate, and then he invited him back, not to help him but to show him exactly how far he'd fallen. That's not anger, that's calculation, that's understanding that the best way to win a fight isn't to punch harder, it's to wait until your opponent is so tired they'll walk into your punch themselves and then call it a second chance. So here's the question for you. Have you ever accepted an invitation from someone who hurt you, believing it was reconciliation, only to realize it was just another form of control? Have you ever been so desperate that you accepted conditions you knew were designed to humiliate you? Have you ever mistaken patience for forgiveness, only to discover it was just someone waiting for the perfect moment to prove you were never as powerful as you thought? Drop your answer in the comments, and if you understand that sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't accept the invitation back, it's build something new where no one can set the terms, but you. Subscribe now, because the next story shows what happens when someone refuses the second chance entirely. When they look at the person offering redemption and say, "I'd rather stay fallen than let you be the one to lift me up," and how that refusal becomes its own kind of power.